Everyone, my name is Tiara. We are just going to give people a few minutes to join. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. We're just going to give it just a few seconds for people to join us before we get started. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiara Yakini, and I am with the Disability Rights and Compliance Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I will be your moderator for this session. I am a dark-skinned African-American female with curls in my hair, and I am wearing a Black floral top. For full accessibility, it is critical that speakers first identify themselves by name before proceeding to speak and mute their microphones after they are done speaking. We have ASL interpreters on screen, and live cart captioning is available by turning on subtitles using the CC icon on the lower part of the screen. The host will make sure that a spotlight is on all presenters and interpreters. To view both the presenter and the interpreter, along with any presentation materials, please make sure that the gallery view is selected on your personal device. We will have a question and answer portion during today's session, and attendees can use the Q&A function on the lower part of the screen to type in questions for our panelists at any time. With that said, I am happy to welcome you to today's program on literary accessibility, as we also observe Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So you might ask, what is literary accessibility? And to be honest, that is a question that we received quite a bit in promoting today's program. Simply put, literary accessibility is making sure that reading materials are available to everyone, considering that people consume information in different ways. We have a dynamic panel of presenters who are going to speak to us about the need for accessible literature and the resources that are currently available. Please join me in welcoming Scott Norris from the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons at the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, Pat Love, Education Consultant for the Michigan Department of Department of Education, that is, Tyler Smeltkop, I apologize if I messed up your name, Tyler, and Kristen Campbell from Michigan State University's Resource Center for Persons with Disabilities. And finally, Diko Youssef, a pioneering researcher in the exciting new field of literary audiobooks at the University of Leeds in the UK. So we're going to start by talking about why literary accessibility is so important. And I'll turn the floor over to Scott to start us off, and then our other panelists can join in as they wish. So Scott, I will start with you. Why is this discussion on making reading accessible for everyone so important?
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Norris. I'm the manager of the Braille and Talking Book Library here in Lansing, Michigan. And literary accessibility is important so that people can access information. And I think today in 2024, since this is an election year, it's important that people have access to information on voting and to find out about the candidates, what their positions are, who they are, when we have to vote. And this is just one example of information that the public needs to be good citizens in the United States. But globally, it's the same issue. It's information. What do people want to know about? And whether it be a cookbook, recreational reading, or some type of nonfiction material they want to access, information is crucial, and it could be crucial in your job as well.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Scott. Pat, I'll ask you the same question. Why is literary accessibility so important?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Pat Love, Psycho, and I am an African-American woman. And today I'm wearing a red pinkish colored top, and I have my hair up in a bun. I am also an education consultant at the Michigan Department of Education Low Incidence Outreach. Accessibility, literacy accessibility is very, very crucial to people who are blind and visually impaired, because if you think about it, our environment, our society is just bombarded with print material. Whether someone is accessing their computer, they're looking at print material. Whether there's billboards, when people are driving, that's in print. So there's a lot of print information everywhere we go, whether we're at a restaurant, whether we're in a school, the library, the airport, we're just bombarded with print. And if a person does not have sight at all or limited sight, then that limits them to that literacy, the print literacy. And so therefore, it's crucial that we have the same access. We have the right to be able to read and to know what's available out there. When I go into a restaurant, I don't always want to depend on a sighted person reading a menu to me. I want that menu in Braille if that's what I prefer. When I walk into a building, I want the elevators to be labeled in Braille so that I can independently access the elevator. And so it goes on, like Scott said. So that's why it's crucial to us. And if you stop and think about it, having that print material or print access available to someone that is blind or visually impaired can be life-saving, because if you can't see what's going on, if someone have a message flashing, saying tornado warning or whatever, or hazardous area ahead, if you can't see that, then that individual is putting themselves in a vulnerable situation.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you for that, Pat. And you made some very, very good points. I'm going to ask the same question to Deco. Why is literary accessibility important to you? And have you personally been impacted by a lack of accessibility when it comes to reading materials and literature?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My name is Diko Yusuf. I'm from Nigeria, Kaduna State, Nigeria, specifically. And I am visually impaired, so that means I have low vision. And I think enough has been said, and I think really, really well by Pat and the previous speaker before her. So I think I'll talk about just a little bit about how it has impacted me personally. So I think in education, specifically, right from secondary school and my first degree in the university, finding accessible formats of texts that have been prescribed for schoolwork was always a little bit of a challenge, because when it is not recognized that not everybody has access to printed material, like Pat rightly said, then a lot of people don't have access to information or the kind of literature that they need to read in order to perform as they might well want to within either an educational setting or even in an election setting. Also something that I had an issue with voting back in Nigeria for a time. So I think for those reasons, literary accessibility is important, and literary accessibility also in a broader context of not just blind and visually impaired people, but also for people who are just unlettered, non-literate people just who don't have a knowledge of how to read at all. And also people that have other neurodiverse disabilities that are not able to read because of so many other forms of neurodiversity. So I would say, yeah. So for those reasons, I think literary accessibility is very important, and I'm glad to see how this conversation unfolds as we talk some more on this. So thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Deco. And I see Kristen and Tyler were nodding in agreement, and I would love to hear from each of you on what your thoughts are on this conversation.
Hi, my name is Kristen Campbell. I'm a white woman with brown wavy hair. I'm wearing glasses with a brown rim on the top and clear on the bottom, and a white and gray striped blouse today. I'm going to echo a lot of what Deco just stated. Coming from the Resource Center of Persons with Disabilities at MSU, my job mainly is to work with accessible media, and my key importance of literary accessibility is the equity of it. I work with a lot of students with visual impairments and them needing their textbooks, course materials in accessible formats, and coming from the equity piece of being able to process that material within the same fashion, same pace as the rest of their classmates. And so coming from the academic side, I see it's important that all students are able to access their information to be successful.
This is
Hi,
Tiara
I'm
speaking.
Tyler Smoltikop. Today I'm wearing a green Spartan shirt. I have short brown hair. I'm wearing glasses that have clear lenses clear frame, and I have a short brown beard. Just to add to what wonderful things everyone else has already said, we do feel very strongly at RCPD that our students are entitled to autonomy and the ability to drive their education, particularly at post-secondary level. So it's very important that as much as possible, these materials are as accessible as they can be, because we are talking about research behaviors. So we have library materials that need to be readily available in accessible format. Faculty are creating content themselves, and we also deal with the entire publishing paradigm where those publishing entities are introducing those required materials for students to interact with. And at all levels, it's very important that students have access to information online in hard copy and in all of their course experiences.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you all so much for that. I'm interested in learning more about the services that you all provide at MSU, and maybe you can address this later, but I'm wondering, you know, how you receive a course syllabus when you're signing up for classes. Is there a statement somewhere that lets students know that they can access the course materials in a different format? You don't have to answer that right now, but that's just something that I'm curious about. So right now that you all have set the stage regarding why literary accessibility is important, I want to take a look at the resources that are available right here in Michigan. And so I'm going to turn the floor back over to Scott to talk to us about the Braille and Talking Book Library. Scott?
Thank you. This is Scott again. I would like to start off by just relating one issue, how the lack of literary accessibility affected me, which I didn't address previously. When I was in law school, we were required to take a course called Evidence. And I approached a professor that was teaching that class and asked him about the book he was using, and he said, "Oh, this is a great book. Yeah, I'm gonna be teaching the class next term, and this is the book we're going to use." I thanked him, and at that time, I went to Recordings for the Blind and Dyslexic, now Learning Ally, sent them 2 copies of the book, had the book recorded. And lo and behold, when it was time to sign up for classes, this particular professor was not teaching Evidence. And then I asked him if the professor that was teaching it was going to use that particular book. And he said, "Oh, no, that we're not going to use that book. That's a terrible book. I would never use that book again." And I just talked to the guy 3 months previously, and he said it was a great book. So now I spent, money purchasing the book, getting it recorded, and it was, well, half useless to me. Anyway, As I said previously, I'm the manager of the Braille and Talking Book Library here in Lansing. We are one of a network of libraries around the country that function under the auspices of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, NLS. NLS was started in 1931 under the Pratt-Smoot Act. This is your history lesson for the day. And the purpose of the program originally was designed to provide reading materials to blinded veterans from World War I. And as the decades passed, that was expanded to all adults, then children, people with physical disabilities that prevent them from holding a book or turning pages, and then more recently for those individuals with print disabilities. So what do we have? We have audio books that are human narrated. We have the playback equipment to play those books. We have some accessories like headphones and pillow speakers. We have hard copy Braille books. And since last April, as far as the Braille and Talking Book Library goes, we have the NLS provided Braille e-reader. This is a 20-cell refreshable Braille display that has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, so it is capable of downloading Braille books from our BARD website. BARD stands for Braille and Audio Reading Download. And for any of our patrons, they can get the BARD app for free from either the App Store or the Google Play Store or Amazon for their Fire tablet. And they can play books on their mobile device or their computer. I just checked this morning, and BARD now has approximately 156,535 books available to our patrons. And you might think, wow, that's a lot of books, but in reality, it's really not that many. If you're familiar with Bookshare, for example, Bookshare has over 1 million books in its collection. And so the National Library Service does not have everything everybody wants. We also have a number of, over 80 magazines available in print, in audio and Braille. And still, there are thousands of magazines available in the world. When I started here in 1997, NLS was producing approximately 2,200 books a year, and they give you a percentage that at the time was approximately 5% of the total number of books copyrighted in the United States in a year. So as you can see, the material that we have, unfortunately, is quite a bit less than what is available to a print reader. Now, as I said, we have the BARD website, and so that involves technology. Technology has allowed us as blind people, which I am a blind person, and with our mobile devices, for example, we can access things like Kindle and Nook and Libby and Hoopla and other things like that. But still, that's only a fraction of the written material that is out there. There is scanning software now that allows us to use some of that access print material. But again, you have to be able to afford that. Those devices, you have to know how to use the device, And you have to know the availability of those apps or different technologies that allow you to access print material. And even with all of that, you're still not going to access everything. And I think that the example that Pat used, going to an airport, there are hundreds and thousands of signs in airports, either advertising the airlines or anything else. And, access to that information is denied to people who are blind or low vision. I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much for that, Scott. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Pat to talk about Braille textbooks for K through 12 students. Pat?
Okay, thank you, Tiara. So this is Pat speaking again. So our agency, Low Incidence Outreach, excuse me, our primary goal is to provide textbooks to students that are in an accessible format. So under the guidance and supervision of Roxanne Balfour, Director of Michigan Department of Education Low Incidence Outreach, in collaboration with the respective requesting school districts, the Instructional Materials Center, IMC, has produced 299 Braille production requests this past year. I'm going to start right here. So our our agency actually has a Braille production that is housed right at the agency in Lansing, Michigan. And so every year, teachers send in the textbooks that the kids will need for the following school year. So the months, I would say February through June is a very, very busy season for our Braille production, because that's the time when teachers are sending in those textbooks, and our production staff, they're busy trying to get those books in Braille. And I'm very proud to say that in the past, I would say like the past 10 years or more, we've been able to get those textbooks in the hands of our students at the same time that the sighted kids are receiving their textbooks. Keep in mind that Low Incidence Outreach, we service students in the state of Michigan, 0 through 26. When we talk about having textbooks in accessible format, we're not just talking about Braille, but we're also talking about large print for our visually impaired students too. The Braille textbooks and worksheets and tactile graphics has to be put, has to be put in a tactile format. That means that students will be able to feel the graphics simultaneously as a sighted person is looking at an image in their textbook. We also provide at our agency classes for paraprofessionals, family members, and teachers. So we have a regional Braille class or just Braille classes. And we started this back in 2002 because we realized that there was a need, not just to have those textbooks in the hands of students in a timely fashion, but we also realized that those individuals working with those kids on a daily basis, they need to be proficient in Braille, okay, in the Braille code. And so we actually teach a 16-week Braille class, and these classes are taught maybe 3 to 4 times a year. Our classes are always filled each year. And like I said, it could be paraprofessionals, it could be parents, grandparents, even sometimes teachers. So we're very, very passionate at Low Incidence Outreach when it comes to accessibility for students. The other thing I want people to understand too, is that when we talk about accessibility, a lot of times people think auditory. Well, yes, that is the part of accessibility. So if I can't get it in Braille, if we can't receive it in large print, then an alternative method may be making sure that it's in an audible or auditory format. A lot of times we use people that are blind and visually impaired, we use a screen reader to access our computer. And we know that we live in a digital world today. Everything is centered around technology. And so for our students that are blind and visually impaired, we're always looking to level the playing field for them so that they can keep up with their peers. So not only are we providing textbooks in Braille or in print, but we're also making sure that those kids have the proper software that they need. So the software that we use, and by the way, I am blind and been blind practically the entire time, my whole life. So, and I've used a software called JAWS. So it allows us to be able to access what's on the computer. But keep in mind that technology does not take the place of literacy. It does not take the place of Braille. Braille is to a blind person just like print is to a sighted person. We would never tell a sighted student, no, you cannot have print. I just want you to listen to what your computer is saying. So the same applies to a student that is blind or visually impaired. They have the right to be able to read. Think about math. Math is one of those subjects that if you can't see those equations, it's very difficult to solve them. I always tell people, and people get a little bit puzzled when I say this, I'm a visual learner. Even though I'm totally blind, I'm a visual learner. What do I mean by that? I mean that I need to see things in Braille. I learn better if I can read it for myself. And there's a lot of people like that, you know, they need to be able to see it and then you can grasp it better. And so we have the right to be able to have that for our students too. So even though kids do have access to various technologies, like Scott said, you know, we also want to make sure that they do have that Braille, that they do have access to large print. There are devices out there that can be connected to the computer. We call those refreshable Braille displays. And those devices will also help students to be able to access their tests via the computer. I'm happy to say that the tests at the college level are SATs and ACTs. They're beginning to move forward and making sure that those tests are accessible for students that are blind and visually impaired. And so our kids will be able to use a refreshable Braille display to be able to read those tests, just like the sighted kid will be able to see it. It's not always beneficial or helpful to have someone to read something to you all the time. You think about privacy issues and confidentiality. So therefore, that's why it's so important. Literary accessibility is so important for that. The other thing that we try to do at our agency is we teach students and we hold workshops on advocacy and transition skills because, you know, they need to learn how to advocate for themselves. So when they attend their IEPs, you know, their the individual education plan team committees, that they can sit there and they can tell the people around the table, this is the kind of media that I need in order to be successful. And then that carries on over to college and it carries on over to their jobs. The other resource that I want to share today too is Seedlings Braille Books. That's a nonprofit organization. It's located in Livonia. And so they produce high quality, low cost Braille books for students. And these can be fictional Braille books or non-fictional Braille books. They have a project under their agency where a kid can receive 2 Braille books a year free. And they can sign up for that particular project every year. And that's at seedlings.org. So there's a lot of different things that we provide at LIO, Low Incidence Outreach, that help to make sure that our students here in the state of Michigan are receiving things in accessible format. One thing before I want to pass it on to our next speaker is, I want you to keep in mind too, is that when we talk about having textbooks and worksheets in accessible format, it's very, very, very important that we have the right people that are trained professionally to be able to produce those textbooks. So Our Instructional Media Center coordinator, Robert Beaton, he's a professionally licensed, trained transcriber, Braille transcriber, and he works with other transcribers here in the state of Michigan, and sometimes transcribers in other parts of the country, to make sure that those textbooks are put in Braille, because they have to be formatted the correct way. There's nothing worse than Braille that doesn't read correctly. You know how sometimes you get something to print and it's like, man, this is really messy print, or I can't understand this person's handwriting. Well, the same thing applies when it comes to Braille. So sometimes if the Braille isn't done correctly, then it's very difficult for our students to be able to read it, to be able to access it. So I'm going to stop right here. So pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Pat, for that. You gave us so many considerations for those of us who provide services to the public, and so we appreciate that. Now I'm going to turn the floor over to Tyler and Kristen to talk about student accessibility and accommodations at the university level. And so Tyler and Kristen, you now have the platform.
Thank you, Tiara. This is Kristen Campbell speaking again. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having us. Me and my supervisor, Tyler Smeltikop, are excited to be here talking about student accessibility and what accommodation services look like over at Michigan State University. Next slide, please. Already, so this is Tyler and I. Go ahead, Tyler.
So my name is Tyler Smeltikop. I'm the Assistant Director for Assistive Technology Innovation with the MSU Resource Center for Persons with Disabilities, which serves as the Student Disability Services Office at MSU. And I would add, I am deaf as well.
I'm the Leadership Development and Accessible Media Coordinator over at the RCPD. And with that, I get to advise a student group on campus called Tower Guard that I'll speak a little bit about in a few slides from now. And with accessible media, I work alongside our blindness and visual impairment specialist, creating Braille and tactile graphics and text for some students within our office, as well as also investigating accessible formatted books for all students. Next slide, please. So we always like to start our presentations with these two slides. Over at Michigan State, we are leaders of inclusivity. Creating equitable experiences on campus is a passion of our team. Next slide, please. And we are also stewards of technology. Testing and experimenting with assistive technologies is core to our function. So a short agenda within our 10-minute panel time for us is going to be, we're going to take a look at what accessible content looks like at MSU. We're then going to go into implementing literary accessibility at Michigan State and talking about that student group Tower Guard. And then we'll end with current successes and challenges within this work. I'll pass it over to Tyler.
Thank you. Go ahead and next slide, please. So at RCPD, we think about who we make our content accessible for. And it's more than just students with blind and visual impact. We have accommodations that can entitle students with various types of impact to have access to course content in formats that are compatible with assistive technology. We find that having course content, whether that's electronic textbooks, PowerPoints, any form of content our faculty members create in our learning management system and so on. There are so many different types of content that we have various types of impact that also experience obstacles with access, and our office tries to remedy that for populations with vision loss. We are promoting the use of screen readers such as NVDA and JAWS, as well as working with faculty to produce content in accessible format. We also find that students with cognitive impacts, which would be things along the lines of ADHD and dyslexia, there is software that we term content interaction software that also provides text-to-speech options so that there's that multimodal access for those that have that get benefit from reading content as well as hearing it at the same time. These would be programs like Read and Write and Kurzweil 3000. We also make sure that content is accessible for students with dexterity impacts, so that software like Dragon, dictation, screen reader, and even user interface interaction software can all interact with the program as well as the content that is being used in an electronic modality. Next slide, please. So we touched on this a bit, but one of the main reasons that it's really important to have accessible content is so that that access is ready when the student needs to have it for their educational purposes. Timeliness to access is crucial, but delays in access can compound over time, which is one of the reasons, one of our primary goals to make sure that content is accessible. Student success depends on the availability of these resources in the format that works best for them. As Pat Love highlighted, some students do prefer to have access in Braille. We also have 3D printer to make content, mathematic and scientific concepts tangible and tactile as well. There are lots of different formats, and students are entitled to choose the one that works best for them. The fact that content is selected by faculty, we try to drive faculty to use library electronic resources so that there is a large impact on having these equitable experiences available to students because that content was acquired in an accessible format or made available from the publisher in an accessible format. We do also find that having faculty select these electronic resources mean that faculty are selecting content that's up to date. It doesn't have a cost to the student. It's relevant, current, and in general, more recently produced content is also more likely to be published in an accessible format through these aggregators that our library accesses this content through. All right, I'll hand it off to Kristen next.
So we're going to get into the how of creating access, and we're going to highlight different e-text options. Next slide, please. So we start with evaluating all options first. We first encourage our students to do some of the investigating on their own. Some easy to find accessible versions are already available, including finding the e-textbooks already on Kindle. You could do a simple Amazon search. Oftentimes there is a Kindle version within a decent price to then buy that textbooks. Students can also use the source VitalSource to search a book or ISBN number and might be able to find a version that works for them already created. We also, like Tyler said, we encourage faculty to create course material that are already accessible, screen reader friendly, have image descriptions, and all of those accessible aspects already. And in times where they might not have that, or they might have chosen a textbook that is not already made Braille friendly or screen reader friendly, that's when us at RCPD step in. Next slide, please. This is where TowerGuard comes in. And so part of my job is advising a student organization that works with sophomores that volunteer to partner with RCPD at Michigan State. TowerGuard members work throughout the year to help e-text or create electronic textbooks. They also help in general make MSU a more inclusive campus. So what the e-texting process looks like is they have a team that review publisher resources out there. They look through different databases and publishing sources to see if there is an existing file. In the case that there's not an existing file, they go ahead and they use programs such as Abby FineReader to OCR or scan the textbook to create a Microsoft Word document. And then students will line by line go through and create any edits to make sure that it has scanned over appropriately. In the past, TowerGuard, as early as the early 2000s, it's funny, Scott mentioned it, TowerGuard members in the 2000s were still creating voice recordings of books. So technology has come a long way from going to audiobooks to now having those digital files. But I also want to recognize what Pat Love said. A good portion of my job is also creating Braille documents and tactile graphics. So it's kind of a balance of finding these digital files as well as making sure students are receiving materials in whatever way works best for them, whether that's digital or tactile. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Tyler.
So when we think about the work that we do around creating accessible content, we obviously have some successes and we also run into some challenges. As anyone who works in accessibility probably experiences, some things work better than others, and sometimes the obstacles we encounter are sort of systemic and at large. So can you go to the next slide, please? So some of the successes we've had, we've really revamped our ability to scan electronic or scan hard copy material that is provided to us by the student. One of the things that we were encountering with that conventional scanners require some destruction of the actual hard copy content in order to produce the high quality scan. And obviously that's not desirable. So we have what's called a book edge scanner that enables the scanning of these larger textbooks, sometimes larger than the standard 8.5 by 11 page size, so that the integrity of the physical material can still be maintained while getting that high quality scan for good OCR. We also have at MSU multiple levels of intercollegiate efforts at the Big Ten to motivate publishers of academic content to essentially start creating their content that's being produced now in those accessible formats to essentially eliminate the need for this type of remediation, as well as creating more straightforward avenue to request material in these accessible formats. So if they are not conventionally available in format that could be purchased or acquired through the library, that the files in EPUB format or whatever format they have that would work with the students' assistive technology, we can get that from the publisher. We also have been working with PowerGuard and our students to, and as well as our specialists in our CPD to help create a culture among our students to encourage that accessible environment, both in the classroom and all throughout campus for their peers. We recognize that our students not only are here to onboard an education and develop the requirements to begin a career, there's also the social aspect, the student life element, and we at MSU try to make sure that all of our students with visual impacts are fully supported all throughout the various elements of Spartan life, if you will. Can you go to the next slide, please? So one of the main challenges that had just emerged for us is one of our primary sources of ebooks, Access Text Network, which is essentially a four-stakeholder partnership between the Association of American Publishers, the University of Georgia, as well as a few other affiliate publishers and affiliate universities putting in e-texts that were remediated. That has discontinued. It was a primary source for our remediated accessible e-textbooks. So we have been working with the library at MSU, as well as working across many different universities to collaboratively figure out ways to essentially replace that source. Access Tech Network has something in the neighborhood of 750,000 titles in there. So it represented a large decimation to our ability to serve those titles promptly. We also find that at the post-secondary level, what we're really seeing with the kind of complexity in textbooks and other educational materials, including content that faculty are creating, can be more difficult to remediate and produce in accessible format. We have licenses for things like Equatio to help produce equations in accessible format that will work for our students. However, because a lot of the content is created by our faculty, there's a training element that comes in play, and training is the onboarding and training varies from individual to individual in some cases. So in our own office, subject-specific remediation does vary quite a bit. So STEM material and the science and mathematics content tend to present challenges that we don't see in more general area studies, as well as arts and letters kind of content where it was produced in a textual format and remains in a textual format versus STEM content, which is frequently very visual or depicted in visual formats such as charts and graphs and diagrams and medical illustrations and things all along those lines. But we are seeing some very interesting advancements in generative AI and learning AI systems, something that we're researching at MSU and developing some solutions around in RCPD as well. So I'm hoping that in a matter of months, we'll have more progress to maybe report about around that. And certainly lots of other institutions are also working in that direction as well. So next slide, please. So thank you for the opportunity to speak about what we're doing at MSU and in our CPD and how that connects with some of the larger efforts that are occurring in the state of Michigan. Our emails are posted, and we will post them in the chat if we're able to, if you'd like to have any follow-up conversations later. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Kristen and Tyler, and to all of you, Pat and Scott, for making us aware of the resources that are available here in Michigan. But right now, I would like to shift gears just a little bit to talk about the gaps that still exist when it comes to accessibility here in Michigan and even beyond. So with the resources that you all just mentioned, I would like to know from your perspective, are there still gaps that need to be filled here in Michigan when it comes to accessible reading materials? And Pat, perhaps we can start with you.
So this is Pat speaking. Absolutely, there are gaps. Going back to the technology piece, as we know, if you stop and think about it, how often are we on our computers? Okay, whether you're at work, excuse me, whether you're at work or whether you're at home, whether you're looking at something online, socially, or you're looking at something professionally, a lot of the majority of websites are not accessible. And so, and this is an issue in this country and in the state of Michigan that we're constantly advocating for. When I think about, let's think about parents of students that are blind and visually impaired. What if that parent can't see? Or what if you have a blind parent or visually impaired parent, the kids can see, but the parent cannot see? We all know that in order to access the students' records, the reports, you know, what does the school district say? You know, you can locate this information online. Well, if that website is not accessible, then the parent has a very, very difficult time trying to access his or her child's information online. When we talk about accessibility for websites, we're talking about things, excuse me, such as color contrast, because if a person is visually impaired, low vision, color is crucial. So, you know, whether you're using dark on white or light on a dark background, that's very important. The size, the font, that's important. There's so many websites out there that uses a bunch of images and graphics. Well, that means absolutely nothing to me if that isn't tagged properly. There's been times where I've gone to websites and it may say graphic. Well, you know, that graphic is telling me, oh, that's the picture or something, but it isn't explaining to me what that picture is. So when I think about the gaps in accessibility, literary accessibility, the main thing that comes to my mind, and the first thing, you know, websites is our internet, because our students still have to go out there and do research papers. They still have to, you know, access the various websites. I will say this, is that a lot of the big companies such as Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they are working very closely, you know, with the big consumer groups like National Federation for the Blind and American Council for the Blind. They're working closely with Congress to make sure that their websites are accessible. And so they're not just, excuse me, thinking about it, but they're actually hiring engineers that are blind and visually impaired. They're talking to people out there that are blind and visually impaired that actually use their products and say, hey, does this work? What do you suggest? And that's powerful to someone like myself, because you know, you want to get the input from the person that actually uses it in order for you to move forward and make things more accessible for us. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much for that, Pat. And I hope that the change makers who are listening are taking notes. I heard you say we need to be more mindful, even though we have services targeted for students, we need to be more mindful of their family members that might be in need of services as well. Also, we need to be mindful of accessibility when we are creating digital content. So thank you for that, Pat. Would any of our other panelists like to share before I turn the floor over to Deco? Well, it looks like you summed it up perfectly, Pat.
Tiara, this is Scott. I'd like to make a comment.
This is Tiara. Go ahead, Scott. Thank you.
This is Scott speaking. And listening to Tyler and Kristen and Pat, who all deal with students, and you know, students have a better handle on technology, I think, than many of the patrons that I serve, because the Braille and Talking Book Library, about 2/3 of our, or better, of our patrons are older than 65. And so when you're dealing with an older age group, you know, technology is an issue, as Pat had mentioned, with accessing websites and getting these folks to accept technology, to use technology, and to afford technology is certainly an issue. Now, we do provide training here at the Braille and Talking Book Library on mobile devices. We provide training on JAWS, and that's fine. But again, you know, the people have to have that technology. And, you know, there's a bit of an equity issue. I've been to the Resource Center with for persons with disabilities. I've seen the Tower Guard in action. You know, Mike Hudson has a great shop over there, and they do really wonderful work. But, you know, that's not true for all of the universities and colleges in Michigan or around the country, unfortunately. So, you know, you might get A1 service at MSU, and then if you were in some small college, either in Michigan or another state, you know, your access to information may be somewhat limited, comparatively speaking.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much for that, Scott. So while we do have some great resources, I'm hearing that we still have some work that is to be done here in Michigan. And Tyler, do I see you wanting to make a comment?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to build off of what Scott was saying. And one of the issues, I think one of the gaps is that disability in general is expensive. There are costs associated with the technology, the services. You know, Scott mentioned the case of his textbook having to switcheroo and having all the time and the money invested in that go for naught. Hopefully it was still a useful resource for him as a student, but it is a frustrating situation that represents that cost of time and money. I'm referring to also how we've seen some amazing advances as recently as the Library Without Walls conference that Kristen and I were able to go to. We learned about some of the newest developments with JAWS, integrating generative AI and other technology to do visual interpretation and description on the fly. And JAWS has a cost, NVDA does not. NVDA does not have some of these emerging technologies and may not be on the roadmap. So as that technological gap grows and increasingly imposes the cost, that is a concern that we see, where while we have a license for JAWS at MSU for students to utilize, there is a concern sometimes that they will graduate and then leave our supportive environment to workplaces where they will need to advocate to continue to have access to these for-cost technology to be supported. Of course, there are services like the Michigan Rehabilitation Services to assist with that and advocate for employees in Michigan workplaces. But I really think that one of those accessibility gaps is the cost associated with technology. We do our best to support them, but it's a factor.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Tyler. You made a very important point. At this time, I want to turn our attention to Diko Youssef, who is joining us all the way from the UK to talk about his literary audiobook research, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And interestingly enough, just this past week on one of my social media feeds, there was a huge debate going on regarding whether listening to audiobooks is considered reading. And so I would love for Diko to take a minute to talk to us about the research that he has been engaged in and some of the issues that are happening abroad. Diko?
Thank you very much, Tiara. This is Diko speaking. Yeah, I think your point about the debates that are happening about reading and audiobook reading, and I think Pat touched on this earlier as well, about what people read and how they read, I suppose. My research is titled Listening for Race, Audiobooks and the African Literary Reader. So listening for race means that I'm listening to texts to detect aspects of race and aspects of representation in audiobooks. But I'm also interested not just in any audiobook, but particularly in African literary audiobooks. Why African? So when I started to do this research initially in my MA, I found out that the research that is currently being conducted is mostly on literature that are, if I may say, Western, mostly written by Americans, or a few written by some Danish authors, but largely, and a couple by African Americans, but largely I haven't come across texts written by Africans. And like I explained in the beginning of this event, when I was growing up, we had texts that were supposed to study, for literature in school, but these are usually not accessible because they were mostly printed, and you would have to get a Braille, I suppose, transcription of them for them to be accessible if a person understands Braille, which I will say that I currently do not read. And so for me, Braille will still be inaccessible, even though my disability is largely visual. So I think, like Pat rightly observed, is about finding materials that are accessible to different people. So now we come to the big question that Tiara, you laid on me, which I'm not going to be able to answer, but I'll just share with you some of the stuff that I found in my research. And my research, so as you probably have noticed, is two-part. There's a reading aspect of it, reading/listening aspect of it, and then there's the aspect that is to do with African literature. So because we're pressed for time and because there's so much stuff that is going on in my research, which is just weird, I'm not going to go into that part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to limit myself to just the notion of reading. What do we understand by reading? What is reading? And a lot of the time, I think the prejudice that we see about different materials that contain within them information or knowledge are treated differently depending on what sensory organ is used to consume that information. So I'll give you a simple example. If a person reads a printed material, let's say a newspaper, that is reading. If a person uses Braille, we still consider Braille as reading, because mostly if a person is reading Braille, they're usually disabled, or they may be specialist in the field, or because they have a larger interest in just understanding Braille. You never know, or maybe they teach it. as well. But when a person listens to that newspaper, let's say it's been converted into an audio format, then that's not quite reading. And so what is the difference between the person who reads the newspaper, the printed newspaper or the Braille, and the person who consumes it orally? Orally here is AURALLY. So what is the essential difference? And that's what I'll be focusing on today, because the whole research that I'm doing is still in its early stages. I'm only like 8 months into my research, so I'm taking in a lot of stuff. So anybody who's listening now, who's interested, I'm going to drop my email with Tara, and they can contact me, and I'm happy to collaborate with anyone, especially as I'm in my early stages. So reading historically as well as scientifically is actually a very difficult term to define, as many academic terms are, but I think reading is a special case in itself. And that, I think, points to the kind of heated debates that you see, Tiara, where people are very defensive of one kind of reading, or maybe trying to say, oh, let's be more inclusive of the term of reading, because it is such a nuanced concept. It's very hard to define, and usually where there's nuance, people lose their heads, and it's very hard to track how the discussion goes. So reading historically in ancient Rome, and I know Scott earlier said that's your history lesson. I'm afraid I'm going to have to drag us a little bit back as well. Even in ancient Rome, they had what they called reader slaves. So there were people who were reading for other people. So usually when they read, it's not necessarily the case that the person was holding a scroll or any kind of material to read. It could be, and this is according to Joseph Howley, that it could be actually that they had a slave with them at the point where that slave was reading for them. But when they come to write, they would say, oh, I read this text, and based on this text, or what this person said in their text, and it's assumed that they're actually reading physically. And not only reading, actually, even writing. So they had reader slaves, but they also had scribes who were called notaries, people, and the slaves that wrote down some of the text. So both reading and writing were either done orally, AURALLY. It might be that the person who describes themselves as readers were actually listening. This is in ancient Rome, or they were writing physically. They might equally be reading physically, or they might be writing physically or dictating to somebody else to read for them. Now that's a historical context of the idea of reading, and the perceptions that people had even at the time of what qualifies as reading. But scientifically now, and this is where it becomes a little bit more muddier, so I'm going to try to be as careful as I can, and this will hopefully be my last point, because I don't want to belabor all the points about reading. But scientifically, so according to neuroimaging, what was found is that actually when people read a work of fiction, so reading a physical book, when you read a work of fiction, you create the world in your mind. The parts of your brain that are activated when you walk, or so these are motor skills, the regions of the brain that are activated when you walk, so the parts of your brain that you use to process, oh, I'm going to walk, I'm going to move my hands around, and so on, are also activated when you read a printed text. Similarly, when you see something, the parts of the brain that you use, the visual cortex, is also the part of the brain you use when you read a book and something is described to you, and you can picture it in your mind, like we say, the imagery that you project within your mind about what is described for you. But, and this is the important bit, it is the same process that occurs when we listen to stories. This is people telling stories to each other, and they're put in an MRI machine, a machine that takes the pictures of our brains while we're engaged in an activity. And what they found was that even when people are listening, their brains are animated in similar ways. Now, why is this the case? That when we read physical texts, we imagine, we create the images in our head. And when we listen to stories, we do something approximately similar, because we wouldn't say the same. And this is where it gets a lot more difficult even than what I've just said. And I hope I'm not losing people while I'm talking. But the thing to remember is that even neuroscientists say that reading is a very complex activity, and we cannot simply say, based on what we see in the pictures of what happens in the brain, we cannot simply say that, oh, reading is only visual. You know, you only read when you hold the book and you see the pictures, or sorry, the words on the page. What actually happens is that when you read, the parts of your brain that are activated are not just the visual cortex, so directly from what you see with your sight, but also it is your auditory cortex that is activated, so that reading is a case of vision and audition. So you're not just using your eyes, but you're also using your ears to process the reading that you're doing, even if it is a physical text and you're not actually reading it aloud. So this is what it says in the research, that reading is so complex that we cannot simply call it a visual exercise or even an auditory exercise. So it's a very complicated landscape. And what I'm trying to do with my research is I'm trying to argue that we read audiobooks. Audiobooks are a form of reading, but they are based on writing. Just like writing is reading, but writing itself is based on speaking. So writing, is what underpins writing is oral speech. What writing is trying to do is that writing is trying to recreate, according to, I can't remember who it is, but according to Eric Griffiths, he says that actually writing aspires, this is the aspiration of writing, this is what writing wants to do in its entire life. Since when it was little, it wanted to recreate speech, which is unbelievable, right? Because when you read a text, you're reading the voice of an absent person. The person who has written that is not there. Their words are there, but they're not there. And I end with this. Writing existed, writing as a form of storing, speech, as a storage device for speech, existed before the recording device for spoken speech. So what I'm doing right now, I can use my phone to record it as an audio file, but that did not exist, for a very long time while writing existed. So writing existed sometime in the 1500s, 1400s, at least printing, not writing, because writing predates that way, way, way back. Sometime, I think it was the 1200 BC, the first earlier recorded story that was written. But more recently, when we talk about print and we talk about books, the kind of books that we know today, largely distributed, that was like in the 1500s. And I think that is significant because that's print, that's a way of storing oral speech. It existed long before the phonograph, which is a way of recording auditory speech. So this gap between them, I think, needs to also be taken account of, so that we have perfected ways of writing, but we have not perfected ways of listening through audio devices. So if I play an audiobook on my phone, there are not enough tools to analyze what I'm playing, but there are enough tools to analyze what I am reading in a newspaper, because it has existed for a long time. We've practiced it, we've depended on it for so long. So it's been perfected as a model of learning, as a model of thinking, so that whenever a person says, pick up a book and read, we automatically associate that with develop yourself, become more thoughtful, become more interesting, intelligent. But when somebody wears these, as I do usually when I'm riding in the train, people might just look at me and dismiss me as somebody who's just listening to music, even though I might be listening to a very complex book. And this, to end, is another question that I will leave you with. Do we interpret audiobooks? So even though I have heard the words spoken to me, is there still meaning that is different from what I'm hearing that I can extract from that? And so this just keeps going, and I will take way too much time if I were to explore everything. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Deco, for discussing the diversities in the ways that people consume literature. One thing that I found really interesting that you just shared was that there were reader slaves in ancient Rome, which is drastically different from the experience of slavery here in the United States, where slaves at one time were not even allowed the opportunity to be able to read. So that's a different conversation regarding literary accessibility, but I just found that very interesting. Right now, I do want to make sure that we have time to address questions from our participating audience. And I see that there were some questions in the Q&A that our panelists have kindly answered, but for the benefit of others who are listening, I am going to read the question, and perhaps panelists, if you want to address these aloud, that would be welcomed. So the first question is, how does a blind person work with math? And Tyler, I see that you typed a response, but if you don't mind, can you please vocalize your answer as well?
Oh, certainly. This is Tyler speaking. I'd be happy to. The response I put into chat in response to the question, there are various types of programs and coding languages that can enable accurate text-to-speech of mathematical statements. MathML and MathJax are two common ones. At MSU, we have a license for something called Equatio, which is a software that lets faculty write an equation. It's essentially, and I included a link to it on one side of the screen. They're typing out their equation, on the other it's coming up with essentially and what it outputs is an image that has automatically associated alternative text that would read out the equation in that proper mathematical vernacular. So, y equals mx plus b would be the alt text on that image. So a sighted user using the electronic content is going to see the equation and visually acquire that. Somebody using a screen reader or text-to-speech technology would encounter the image, and then the image is alt text is read aloud the equation itself, which is one of the ways that we are providing access mathematically in MSU. JAWS also works very well with math, and what we saw at Libraries Without Walls recently around down content in general is looking very promising.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you for that, Tyler. We have another question. It says, my organization is creating a Know Your Rights voting guide. We want to have the guide in multiple accessible formats, such as audio, braille, video with ASL, large print, plain language, etc. Would members of this webinar be willing to provide their expertise so we are able to follow best practices? And I'm not sure if any of our panelists want to respond to that. Kristen, I see that you did type a response, and so I will yield the floor to you now.
Sure, this is Kristen speaking. Rachel, thank you for that question. That would be a great opportunity. First, thank you for prioritizing having accessible formats for important projects like that. Definitely happy to chat more about this and provide any resources that I can or that RCPD can. I provided my email in the chat. It's hanzekkr@msu.edu, and I look forward to chatting more.
So Tiara, this is Pat speaking. Excuse me, I would also wouldn't mind being contacted to give some input on that. But going back to the first question about the math, I agree with Tyler. But when you're thinking of kids that are in K through 12, when it comes to mathematics, I know that the American Printing House for the Blind, which is excuse me, which is a organization that produces textbooks and tactographics and other devices in Braille for students that are blind and visually impaired that are still in the educational system. They're coming out with a multi-line device so that students would be tactile device, so that kids would be able to do those complicated math equations like in calculus, chemistry, physics, and they'll be able to see that whole equation on one device if they prefer to see it in Braille, instead of having it read to them via JAWS or through another reading software. So there are devices out there that will help our students to be able to access their math problems. The old-fashioned way was to use the Perkins Braille writer and Braille the equation out, because we know that math equations can be very long and complex. But again, if that kid prefers Braille versus, auditory, then we should be making sure that they have their preferred media available to them.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you for that, Pat. We do have another question. It actually reads a couple of questions. What is the lead time needed to produce textbooks in an accessible format? And then what happens if a student changes a class in the middle of the semester? That is a great question. And does MSU administration have any existing requirements for faculty in regard to providing accessible formats for faculty created materials? And those questions, I believe, should go to Tyler and Kristen.
This is Kristen talking. I can take at least the first question of that large question. Lead time needed to produce textbooks. That's something that we're always upfront with students when they're placing e-text requests. We try to do this as quickly as possible. Thankfully, we do have publisher resources like Bookshare. More publishers are coming out with their own different accessibility ports like RedShelf. And so a lot of books can be already found. And so that's a quick within a day turnaround to get the files back to the students. In the process of having to ideally scan a book, go page by page to make sure it's scanned over appropriately, or having to create Braille copies, that does take a little bit longer. I usually overestimate and ask for 2 weeks, but ideally it kind of becomes a juggle of prioritizing, and students are upfront with when they need this by, and you kind of create the timeline from there. Many of us have gone through school, and so unfortunately we do know the shuffle of having to change between courses or any random things that happen, and you might have to jump to a different class. That happens. Again, that's usually a conversation with the student to then go back and see what textbook they need, the timing of that, and at least get them the first chapter or two or whatever the rest of the class is needing in that moment. We try to keep it as equitable as possible, that they're right there with the rest of the class.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Kristen.
I'll just go ahead and jump in. The last part about policy around requirements for faculty, I'm just about to paste that in response to that question. But we have a policy in our Office of Civil Rights, our Title IX office, that basically states that anything that exists online under the MSU umbrella as of 2009 needs to be made accessible to all forms of assistive technology. So there's a wide variety of meticulous requirements that are encapsulated under our web access website, webaccess.msu.edu. It not only encapsulates all of these requirements, but also provides assistance and consultation for faculty on demand to move through that process as necessary. And of course, we are always trying to get our faculty to, when they're creating new content, to create that accessibly from the get-go. So more or less, our policy is designed to make sure that faculty understand their responsibilities around the equity of their course content for all students, and also helps ensure that faculty that are using content over a longer period of time, that they are that content is not part of the exception either. That it's not just the content that is being created fresh; it's also content that even relatively current. So I'll go ahead and put that in our Q&A section. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Tyler. Our next question is for Deco. It says, you mentioned that writing is reading and we are reading the voice of the writer. They want you to expound on this concept.
Sorry, Chair, this is Dicko speaking. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. It says Deco mentioned writing is reading and we are reading the voice of the writer. And it says, can you expound on this concept?
Oh, yeah, sure. So that concept actually comes from a psychoanalyst, Freud, Sigmund Freud. And the exact quote, I believe, is that writing in its origin is the voice of an absent person. And I think what he's getting at there is that when you write consciously, the rules of spoken language dictate the terms of how you write. So that the first form of communication that humans have has to be rooted in oral. This is ORAL, oral speech, or oral notions of speaking or communicating. But that is not to say that people don't communicate in other ways. It's just to say that when you write, embedded within writing is some form of speech or some form of physical ways of communicating. And oral traditions also, I should say, they don't just relate to speech, they also relate to gestures, you know, how you move with your hands, because oral traditions are just a larger conception of language that involve different forms of different modes of communication. So it's a very complex concept to expand on in a very short time, but I'm happy to talk about it more in some other
This is Tiara
platform. Yeah.
speaking. Thank you, Deco. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to provide your contact information for participants. Do you mind just stating it now?
Yeah, I can state it now. It's M for Mango, MDYKS069@gmail.com. I don't know, Chera, if you could have typed that and send it in or something in the chat. That would be,
Sure. We will ask Peyton if you don't mind putting that in the chat for participants. Do you mind repeating that, Deco, please?
yeah, it's MDYKS069@gmail.com.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you.
All right.
We do have another question. They want to know about undue hardship. And I think this goes along with the comment that Tyler mentioned earlier, that there is a cost associated with ensuring that literature is accessible. Do any of our panelists want to tackle that question?
So this is Pat speaking. To produce textbooks and materials in Braille can be very costly, and therefore we collaborate with the school district to provide those books in Braille or in large print for the students here in the state of Michigan. Like Kristen mentioned earlier, there's a database out there with the publishers. Those publishers, they publish their files, and so our Braille production staff, they have access to that. And so they're able to download those files and to print those files out. When we think about cost, I want you guys to realize that because, the blindness field, blind and visually impaired, is the low incidence field. So, and it costs a lot. So when we talk about technology, just to give you an example, so we'll be talking about, for example, a Braille display, a refreshable Braille display. You're talking about a device that can cost anywhere from, $4,000 all the way up to maybe $6,000. And that's just one device. We're not talking about multiple devices. When we're thinking about, there are glasses out there now that will help people that are blind and visually impaired to access print materials in their environments. So like if you're going to the grocery store, if you're at the airport, you put these glasses on, and the glasses has a camera on it, and it'll be able to tell you, what you're looking at, and it gives a lot of detail, okay? Very, very descriptive detail. Those glasses can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000. So when we talk about cost can be a hardship, yes, it can be a hardship. People that are blind and visually impaired in this state, let alone in the country, they just don't have that kind of income to be able to get their hands on those types of equipment. And so therefore, what we do here at Low Incidence Outreach, and I'm very grateful for our director, is that I'm able to go to Roxanne each year at the end of the school year and give her, it's called a wish list. So I go out there and I attend different technology conferences. So I stay abreast of what's happening in technology in our field. So I can go back to her and say, hey, there's a new device out there that will help teachers and students to be able to access textbooks more efficiently, to be able to access their environment, or to be able to, do equations or whatever. And so then she will look that over, after I've done the research, and then we could purchase that and we put it in our loan library. So we have a assistive technology loan library at our agency that, excuse me, that teachers can contact us, and they can borrow the equipment to try out with their students for anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks. They can borrow that equipment throughout the school year. And then they can go to their district and say, hey, we need to purchase this after trying it out, because it doesn't make sense to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a piece of equipment that you think may be helpful to a student just to find out that it may not be the best fit. So that's one way that we help to get around, the cost of technology devices and software at our agency, so that we're constantly trying to help level the playing field for students in K through 12 here in Michigan.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you all of you for participating in our panel discussion today. I do have one last question that I want to ask each of you, if you can maybe take 30 seconds to answer. What is something that people can do, like the everyday person who is just listening to this forum and they want to become active or get involved? What is an action that they can take to help promote literary accessibility? Any thoughts?
Tiara, this is Scott. I'd like to say two things. I'll answer your question in a moment. The materials from the Braille and Talking Book Library are all free. I tell people this is your tax dollars at work, and that includes mailing books to you from the library, and you mailing them back. There is no out-of-pocket expense to the patron. To answer your second question, one way people could get involved is become a volunteer for an app called Be My Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is thousands of volunteers from probably around the world that if a person needs something read to them, they can get the Be My Eyes app, put it on their phone, and they use the camera on their phone to scan something. And it could be their thermostat, could be a can of soup, could be printed material. I would caution people that use Be My Eyes to be very circumspect on what they allow people to see. You wouldn't want to get your credit card number or financial information, that type of thing. But if you just want to know, you have an envelope that came in the mail, who is this, the light bill or is it something else? A volunteer would read that for you. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you. Anyone else?
So this is Pat. I would say just be cognizant of if you're writing something or typing things out to put on the web or on the internet, make sure you think in terms of how would someone that is blind and visually impaired access that. You want to make sure that you're writing it or presenting it so that it is accessible to people like myself. Thank you.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you. We did have one more question directed towards Pat, and I will send that to Pat individually, hopefully to
Okay.
connect with that person. But we are at the end of our time for today. As we close, on behalf of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, I would like to thank all of you for spending time with us today. It is our hope that those listening walk away understanding the need to make literature more accessible for everyone. For those interested in learning more about the work of the Disability Rights and Compliance Division, please visit the Michigan Department of Civil Rights website at www.michigan.gov/MDCR. Also, we would like to invite you to our Civil Rights Summit on Fair Housing, scheduled for June 12th at the Icon in Detroit. Registration information can be found on our webpage. Additionally, we will be hosting a virtual ADA commemoration event on July 1st, so please be on the lookout for that invitation as well. We hope to see you all again soon. Thank you for joining us, and bye for now. Thank you.